Hello, Patriotic Christian here. Today I'd like to build off of my first video where I explained rights and explain a little bit further two very different and opposing philosophies or ideologies of government. So there are at least two major categories that I believe all forms of government would fit into, and so the goal here is to simply explain why I think we would all agree on the one. So the first one is this concept of might makes right, is what I'm calling it here. So this is basically the idea that, you know, if one person here were to, through the use of force, sort of impose their will on all of these other people, and this could be an individual or it could be a group, but that's the basic idea of it. And you know, I call it might makes right because their right to rule is based on the fact that they've exerted might over the rest of them. So they have power because they used force to impose that on everyone else. And you know, most people will agree with me that this is wrong because no one person has any more right than anyone else. And so in order for them to rule over everyone in this way, you know, because one of the problems would be if, you know, person here is ruling over everyone, if they decide arbitrarily to take what belongs to this person here, you know, it's like tough luck on that person, right? They have no absolute individual rights that they can assert. Now, there is one little interesting thing about this concept, because if might makes right, then if one or more of these people were to get together and overthrow this authority, they would be just as right as this person was. So I mean, there's no way of saying that they're wrong to rebel, as long as they're able to exert more force than the person in charge and actually overthrow them and either take their place or set up something completely different. They're perfectly justified in doing so. There's no other, you know, basis for that to be right or wrong. It simply is, right? So the other philosophy that I believe we would all agree on is one that starts with individual rights. And of course we get individual rights because we're created by God, which I explained in my first video. But if you have individual rights, the basic concept is you all have an equal share here, and anyone who crosses over into another's is wrong. But, you know, people don't always want to have to constantly guard their rights. You know, protecting your property, for example. Most of us want to be able to go to work and, you know, leave our property and come back to it and be relatively certain that it hasn't been, you know, taken or destroyed. And so this is why, you know, we as a group of people, we delegate certain responsibilities to a government. It's for our own benefit, you know, and we can do that because we have the right to defend our property. Therefore, we have the ability to delegate it to a government to do for us. Now, once this is done, there's a government in place. And the government has, you know, jurisdiction over individuals. And, you know, I drew this as, you know, government in this sort of weird shaped circle. And, you know, all these squares would represent people that it governs. Okay, now, because the basis of this government is individuals created this government, therefore the government is not above the people. Okay, it's important to understand that. The government is there to benefit the people. And in order to do this, it has to respect the individual boundaries. Now, what this government is doing is it's protecting people from external forces, you know, maybe a foreign government or something, but it's also protecting each person from other people, you know, because like in the first video I did, if one person infringes on another, that person is justified in pushing back and defending themselves. So we can have a government that does this for us, you know, so that we don't have to constantly do it for ourselves. It's a convenience. And of course, with that comes our responsibility to fund the government for its legitimate functions. Okay, now where this gets a little bit misunderstood today is, as a great example, you hear some folks say like, well, why would you need to defend yourself? We have the police. And so then I would say to that, it's like, well, where do the police get the authority to use deadly force? Where does it come from? Because if your argument is like, well, because they're in charge, they're the police, they're the government, therefore they have this authority. It's like, well, that sounds an awful lot like this might makes right principle. If the police get their authority to exert force by the sheer fact that they have the ability to exert force, then you're coming from a might makes right mentality, and it's very easy to illustrate how this is just entirely wrong. But if you understand it correctly, and you realize that, well, the government has this ability, this responsibility, and this right to exert deadly force to protect people because they've received that responsibility from individuals who, of course, naturally possess the right. You can only delegate authority that you have. So government has that authority only because it's been delegated to them by individuals. And so another thing that gets often misunderstood today, using the same example of self-defense and police, is people think that because we have a government that is able to protect us, therefore we would be wrong in protecting ourselves. And then you gotta really start thinking about this. Like, well, wait a minute. If you were to, for example, hire a contractor to do work on your house. Let's say you wanted to remodel your kitchen, okay, and you hire them to do that. Now, you're able to hire someone to do that because it's your kitchen and you have the right to remodel your own kitchen, right? Makes sense, okay? Now, does that mean, because you hired a contractor to remodel your kitchen, does that mean that you lose the right to remodel your own kitchen? Of course not. If the contractor's not doing a good job, you can fire them. You could get someone else. You could decide to do it yourself at any point along the way, so long as you're not the one violating the agreement, or the contractor doesn't get to come in and say, well, you know what, I know you told us you wanted it done this way and we had agreed upon a price, but we decided that's not good enough. We're going to do it differently because it's better for you. And then, oh, by the way, here's the updated bill. It's going to cost twice as much. Okay, that would be totally out of line. They can't do that because they had already agreed upon the price. They'd already agreed to do it the way you authorized them to do it. And it's the same thing with government. Going back to the example of the police with self-defense. Like, yes, you've empowered the police to defend you and the military, but you never lost the ability to do it yourself. If the government fails to do it, or if they're not doing it correctly or something, you can still do it yourself. You still have the right. Okay, government doesn't usurp that just because they now have the responsibility of it to some extent. Now, of course, a little bit along the same lines, the government then does not have the ability to tell you cannot. If a government who's been empowered by the people to protect them, the people empower the government to protect them. If the government then starts telling you like, well, I know so-and-so attacked you, but, now you're the one in trouble because you defended yourself. Okay, they don't have the right to do that. They never did because you empowered them to protect you, but you never lost the ability to protect yourself. And so this is just one of those illustrations that I think is very misunderstood today. You probably hear a lot of people saying things like that, like, well, why do you need to do this or that to protect yourself? I mean, you could just call the police. And yeah, it's true. I mean, you should certainly make use of the police to protect you. That's what they're there for. But you don't have to rely on them 100%. And you certainly don't have to let them tell you that you can't look after your own rights yourself because they're out of line to do it. That would be them moving over into this might makes right category, which sometimes does happen historically. You can have a society that starts out right and the government just gets bigger and bigger and more powerful, and eventually they move over. They actually move over into this column where they're basically operating like this. And so then you've got government operating in the might makes right category, and now they're ruling simply because they have the power to do it. And this is a very scary trend, I think, in America today, where it seems like more and more we're moving from a good system, a very good start that we had, and we're moving over into a tyranny. And anyway, that's what I wanted to explain today, and I hope this helps. So hopefully you'll tune in for more videos by me, Patriotic Christian, where I will attempt to explain and simplify things from a biblical worldview and in a historical context.